Welcome to the latest episode of the Talky Taka podcast. We connect with you just before the international break or in the middle of the international break after a fascinating round of football in the Premier League and in the Champions League. Today on the pod, we have Ashwin and RK, and we're going to spend some time talking about the club that these two support in this episode. In fact, that's going to be our first topic. But before we get there, Ashwin, how's your week been? What are your talking moments?
I'm for the first time. I feel I'm happy knowing the fact that there's an international break coming in because that means Man United are not playing, and it will at least be a week where I'm not depressed. Sorry. Speaking of teams that are not playing or are inconsistent, at least that's my talking moment of the week. Spurs doing Spurs things. Um, After all the lows from previous week, Ange got a high against Man United and then lost to a manager who probably could be his kid as well, right? Uh, so Brighton winning 3-2 against Spurs. It was an entertaining game. Definitely, don't get me wrong on that. But yeah, Spurs just look all over the place at the moment, and that kind of made my day. So a bit of sadist pleasure there.
Yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit more about uh, Spurs and even Brighton perhaps on this episode. But before that, again, RK, what's your talking moment of the week and how's your week been?
Yeah, Spurs made my week too, because otherwise it's been pretty grim watching United. But I would go for my talking moment being the like Raul Jimenez assist. I think that was one of a few really eye-catching moments of skill in the Premier League, and totally I kind of didn't expect Jimenez to be the person who would come up with those kind of bag of tricks. But brilliant assist, brilliant goal. It was unfortunate that Fulham, didn't get points from that game. I thought they deserved to get at least a point. That assist definitely deserved at least a point. Unfortunate, but one of the moments of the week for me. Great backheel assist in looping above the defender, giving Pereira really, easy finish.
Absolutely. And that was a hell of a game. Man City definitely looked a little bit rattled and they looked like somebody could get at them. Adama Traore blitzed Kyle Walker. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do that to Kyle Walker and pace. But yeah, and we're going to get into Man City and Arsenal perhaps next week when we're back from the international break. Just rounding up the talky moments, mine I think when RK mentioned that outrageous piece of skill, I first thought about an outrageous piece of skill from the man of the moment, Cole Palmer. After his four-goal display last week, he came up with an absolutely incredible touch and shot in this week's game against Forest. Absolute pure Lewandowski-esque number 9 play. If Bergkamp had done it, he would have been proud. Amazing touch around the defender and took a great shot, and well, it was saved. It was maybe a little bit straight to the keeper, but Cole Palmer is on fire. And but that's not my talking moment of the week. It has to be one of the results of the season, of the week, definitely the week, maybe the season as well. If you just say something like Unai Emery beats Vincent Company, I don't think anybody would bat an eyelid to that statement. But when you add to the context that Aston Villa beat Bayern Munich in the Champions League, now that's something that like sends shockwaves through Europe and through the competition. And as promised, we're going to talk about that competition, the format, and some of the results that we've seen so far in this year's Champions League on this episode. But first, we will get right into the topic of the international week. And there was a chance that this would be the topic of the international week. RK, I'm just going to read out the last few results that we've seen. I think it's a draw at Crystal Palace, a draw at FC Twente, a draw versus FC Twente, a pretty significant loss at home to Spurs, and then two draws to finish off the week against Villa and one in the Europa League as well against Porto. Tough fixtures, you have to say, but at the end of the day, 5 goals scored. 8 goals conceded. I know Ten Hag is now talking about how they've kept a lot of clean sheets. That's the topic of the week for him right now. But I think there's no getting around it. This has not been a good start to the season. After 2 seasons, full seasons in charge of the club, with the structure coming into play, he's under real pressure now, isn't he?
Yeah, it's I was always one of the people who would try and defend him, look at what kind of circumstances that he is in, and probably a lot of United fans would like would have liked to do that at the start of the season. Like, let's see with a better squad, with a fitter squad, how he's able to do. But for me, that Spurs performance more than the result was kind of, it completely killed my belief in Ten Hag. It was one of my worst days, as a Manchester United fan. And so it's definitely, it ranks as probably the worst performance of the whole Ten Hag tenure for me. It over and above the Crystal Palace 4-0, the Brentford 4-0. You can always find reasons why those things would have happened. Maybe Liverpool 7-0 is probably the worst result of the tenure, but after that, probably this is the one. Even the Liverpool one came 1 week after Carabao Cup, so you could always think that it's more of a blip, than something which is permanent. But in many ways, the last couple of weeks, especially the Spurs result, makes this one of the worst, results, one of the worst times of Ten Hag's tenure. Uh, and the worst part has been that let's start with the Crystal Palace game, right? The Crystal Palace game was where a lot of United fans still had a lot of positives. We were still defending Ten Hag, saying that it's been a good start to the season. XG wise, XGA wise, I think people were throwing around stats after the Palace game, saying that the underlying stats have been good, but all of that went out of the window in the next game against 20. People were expecting United to turn up, and try to replicate that performance against Palace, if not better, and get a few goals, get a good result. That didn't happen. It was a very tepid draw, and then you get the Spurs result where after starting off the season, looking for more stability, looking for more position, right, looking for a tighter, compact shape. And then again, we go back to that ping pong basketball style against Tottenham. I don't know why he selected that. That was completely brainless. Maybe he thought that that's the best way of getting at Spurs' high backline, but that was never going to work, especially at home. It was so embarrassing watching that game. I can't even put words to it. And then you go to Porto. Again, it's more of the same. Very, very porous defending, bad mistakes at the back, a lot of space between midfield and defense. And then you try to tighten that up against, in the last game against Villa, but then you lose your attacking thrust. So it's again, the same thing. Either you can't balance the game at all, or you just go all over the place. You don't know what tactics to select. So it's, I mean, it's been a couple of weeks which has killed my entire belief in Ten Hag. He should count himself extremely fortunate that he's still surviving. And for me, the only way he can survive is to go back to basics, to trust his actual tactics. Which brought him to United in the first place. That's the only way he's going to survive.
Yeah, philosophy is something that we've all been talking about a little bit this week on our WhatsApp groups, because the name that's been linked to United, and of course it was bound to be him, because we all know that the owners were close to appointing him in the summer, and they did have a conversation. They did talk money. Thomas Tuchel is being linked with the job. Now, Thomas Tuchel he has a great resume. He's coached the best clubs, managed the best clubs in the world. Um, but he's a little different from the kind of the thinking behind Eric Ten Hag's appointment at United. So Ashwin, I just wanted to understand, what do you make of Thomas Tuchel as a potential replacement? Is it going to be him? Is there somebody else in line? Is Ten Hag even the right choice to continue? What do you think?
So I think so. So United had a meeting this Tuesday where they potentially discussed this. They have obviously kept their cards very close to the chest and haven't really revealed anything. So at this point in time, it seems that Ten Hag will stay. As far as Thomas Tuchel is concerned, listen. He has a really good resume, as you said. He is probably one of those elite coaches out there without a job at this point in time. But United is like this, this place where the best of the best lose their nerves. And with Tuchel, right, he has lost his nerve at places like Dortmund, at Bayern, at Chelsea. So it's very easy to kind of get under his skin. And that's why I don't feel Tuchel would be the right man at United. Um, I remember back in the days when he was coming up at Dortmund, he fired his chief scout, if I remember correctly, and then he also had a fallout with the CEO. Then at Bayern, he had a fallout with Oliver Kahn as well. It is so easy to do that at a team like United, especially with the English press behind you all the time trying to get clicks and stories out of you. I don't think Tuchel is probably the right man. He'll probably end up having fights with some really fiery characters in the dressing room, the likes of Rashford, the likes of Bruno as well. If they do appoint him, and we all know that they wanted to appoint him over the summer as well, it will be a very short term signing, which is probably not the right thing to do at United at this point.
Yeah, RK, I made the point earlier that it's a little different from the Ten Hag appointment from a philosophical point of view. Like you touched upon it as well. Ten Hag's only chance of staying in the job is going back to the basics. But it is also true that he's not acting like a systems coach that we all expected him to act like. I think he's making, dare I say, Tuchel like moves in the last few weeks where he's making tactical tweaks to last the week or last the weekend. Do you think that that's another factor in play here, or is that going to seal his fate more than anything else?
Definitely. I think I completely agree with what you said at the end. What's going to really seal Ten Hag's fate is him not sticking to his principles. It was very clear when we bought Ten Hag why we are buying him for, right? And I think it's quite it's going to give a good insight just walking down that path of how he's of his journey of the last two and a few years, right? So United bought him because he had this fast attacking style of play. At the same time, it was pretty control heavy, pretty possession heavy, high line. So there were a lot of good things about Ten Hag style, right? Which is why he was basically hired like for the United job. He comes into United and finds a very very diverse kind of skill set, right? Which is what is very typical of the Glazer United era. You get all kinds of players in the dressing room. You can't really build a squad around it. It's the worst possible place to come in. You find the likes of Ronaldo on the one hand. You find transitional players like Rash, Bruno on the one side, right? And then you try to bring in players like Eriksen, Lisandro, who are probably better on the ball. But at the same time, you also bring in people like Anthony and Casemiro. So it's all completely all over the place. Was what was Ten Hag's first summer, right? And then the way the season started, the first two games, he had to go back to being extremely practical, extremely pragmatic, and of course that is also the right thing to do because he realized that he doesn't really have the players at all to kind of try to implement his style, right? And then comes the first summer. Again, it's the Glazer era. It's the end of the Glazer era. It's a mixed summer. We get in some players who are suitable for his style. We get in a couple of players like Mason Mount who are probably not, and then we get a lot of injuries. And somehow Ten Hag over the summer, comes up with this hybrid style of play, which also I think influenced the signing of Mount, right? If he had just stuck to his principles that this is I want to build a team in my image, I don't think he would have got Mount in. But because he thought of some of hybrid style of play that he will be able to come up with and succeed, he brought in people like Mount, maybe even Rasmus Højlund, and that's how he started building his squad. He found a lot of injuries, obviously, but the whole style of play, the like the premise was never going to be in the right place, right? It was completely over the place, tactically inept, so to say, right? That was only because he went away from what he knew. I have never seen any elite manager going away from what they know. And in the third season, it seemed like okay, they realized where they went wrong to some extent, tried to put that right. Players who suit Ten Hag style came in, but come the Spurs game, I don't know why he goes back to that completely disastrous style of play. So I completely agree that this is why he's going to get sacked. And I couldn't agree more on Tuchel as well. I don't think he's the right person for United as well. It's like it's between the devil and the deep sea.
Yeah, I think that indecision and that lack of communication is something that is definitely going to be, that final nail in the coffin, right? Because he just doesn't seem sure about it anymore. Like, of course, he goes to the press and he keeps talking about this process. Have you heard someone else say that before? Yes, we have. LBG used to do that so many times. Something with the Dutch managers, I guess. And but like his style of play is something that I've not understood ever. Like if you look at Arsenal, if you look at City, if you look at Liverpool, even Spurs, you can identify a particular style of play. With United, with the 3 seasons or 2 full seasons and the third season now, you don't really know what that is, right? And it has now come to that fact that he's not even trusting his own players. We had 350 million worth of talent that he had bought on the bench in the last game, right? Lisandro Martinez was not playing. Dillett was not playing. We started with Johnny Evans, who's like he shouldn't be playing so many games, right? It is just crazy. Like he don't get me wrong, Johnny Evans played really well. He got deserved the man of the match and all of that. But it was a complete change of how we played in Europe. The other damning stat around Europe is that we have only won once in the last 10 games, and 20% of the uh, games that Ten Hag has managed has resulted in three or more goals being conceded.
Right. Yeah, and going back to your point about his players being on the bench, right? Against Spurs, where he selected that really, weird style of play. Nine of his players, you could argue that nine players, out of 11 on the starting pitch were his players, including Dallo, who kind of he brought into the team, like in a good way, right? For the first time, you could only argue that maybe Bruno and Rash are not his style of players. Everyone else was perfectly a Ten Hag signing, and that's why when you get your kind of players and you don't implement your style of play, then you run out of excuses.
Yeah, and I think if there's any respite, the first game back after the international break is going to be against Brentford, who's probably going to score in the first minute. So that's not going to help things either. And immediately after that game, there's just a little matter of a trip to Turkey to play against a Jose Mourinho team. That sounds pretty tasty for Ten Hag's like immediate future. But moving on, you talked about some of the things. The other Dutch manager, the other Dutch bald manager in town, Liverpool are top of the table at the first of the second international break. But there has been a lot of talk about one, the progress that we've seen under Slot, and conceded only 2 goals in 8 games. It's now the best start any Premier League manager, any new Premier League manager has had in their career. Uh, you add to that a little, a really important bit of context that they've played only people, the highest position team that they've played so far in the league is position 10, and they ended up losing that game to Nottingham Forest at home at Anfield. So the games, I'm just going to read out some fixtures to you now, RK. These are the fixtures the next 12 fixtures up till the 7th of December that Liverpool have: Chelsea at home, Leipzig away, Arsenal away, Brighton away, Brighton at home, Leverkusen at home, Villa at home, Southampton away. Finally, one game which should be okay. Madrid at home, City at home, Newcastle away, and then the Merseyside derby away. These are the next 12 fixtures that Liverpool have. And by the way, for a huge chunk of them, Allison is going to be missing. He's spending around 5 or 6 weeks out as well. So I guess what I'm asking, RK, is what do you think of the start so far, and what do you think is going to happen during this hellish run coming up for Arne Slot?
Yeah, it's I knew that the next 7 or 8 fixtures are going to be tough, but this is more like is almost like a quarter of the season. Like because after that 7th December game, like game against Everton, you leave one game in between, and then you have Spurs again. And of course, you have like a couple of weeks after that, there's United. Of course, United in their current form aren't. Let's not talk of them in the same breath. But yeah, it's a really really tough run of fixtures, and I think at least my reading of how it's gone for Slot is that defensively quite sound. right? But I don't think the team ever gets enough away from the opposition, and it's not like they are really putting distance between themselves and the opposition when they are on top. And they do have these phases of play in every game, or in a lot of games at least, where they have kind of sat back or not really had too much momentum. I think we saw that against Wolves in the previous game as well. We saw that against United also. Once Liverpool went 3-0 up, we saw it in the game that they lost to Forest. We have seen it all across the season. Ipswich Town, I think they struggled for the first 1 hour. So it's I think in attack, in terms of the attacking rhythm or being able to create enough chances in a short spell of time, it's been slightly up and down. But the good thing is that they have been solid right through. I can remember very few instances when they have been really, really vulnerable. Probably a few minutes against, was it Milan in the Champions League? I don't remember, where, probably they were a bit at sea in the first 10-15 minutes of the game. But other than that, I don't really remember Liverpool being too open. So I think a lot of things to be positive about, but uh, it's not really that. It's too early, I would say, because of the things you mentioned, to read into Liverpool's result, just because of the quality of the opposition that they have faced.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no getting carried away by being top of the table. I think they are still a third place targeting team at the moment, and I think this run is going to be really difficult for many reasons. One of them, obviously, the difficulty of opponent is the primary reason, but also the it's every 3 days for the next 2 months, and I don't know. Every time he's been asked about it, Arne Slot says that, hey, just by the way, we also play Champions League and Europa League in the Dutch Eredivisie, and he keeps saying that, but it is definitely different when you're playing the quality of teams that you're playing in the Premier League, and then the quality of teams that Liverpool are going to play in the Champions League. We're talking about Leverkusen, Leipzig, and Madrid are the next three fixtures in the Champions League, and filled with all these amazing Premier League teams that he has to play as well. Not got a very easy Carling Cup. I keep saying Carling Cup, but Carabao Cup game against Brighton either. Not the easiest one. So all in all, it's going to be the biggest challenge I think he's ever had in his career for the next 12 games. Whatever, of course, okay. I think I'm writing off. Of course, he won the league, and I'm sure that was a big challenge. But at a big club, this is going to be the biggest challenge that he's faced so far.
But
And of course, there'll be an
just given that the teams that they have had, right? But like, even given that, did you expect this kind of a start? And
Absolutely not. Yeah, yeah. So in that sense, absolutely not. I didn't expect one. I didn't expect the results of what is it? 9 out of 10, 9 wins out of 10 in all comps right now. Definitely didn't expect that. The other thing I didn't expect is that a very visible uh, change in the way that we play. I didn't expect that to come through as quickly as it did. I think by the third or fourth game that we played, we were able to see that, okay, there is a clear, like you mentioned, right? Like the solidity or the not being too open, which was a big problem last season. While there have been, you're right, there, especially in the more recent games, there have been periods of time where we are losing control, and Slot has talked about how that's a worry and that's something we need to fix. But from the third or fourth game onwards itself, we were able to see a very different intent in possession, and also extremely different risk appetite when it comes to defending transitions. The Everybody's breaking a gut to make sure there are 5 or 6 men behind the ball when an opponent just gets a sniff of a transition, which was a big miss last season because we were so over the top committed to having an advantage on the other side that we left transitions left, right, and center in the final season under Klopp. So that's definitely a change, and that's one of the reasons we've looked solid, is that transition defending has been a lot better than it was last season. And on the ball, I guess that's part of the same point. On the ball, we're being less risky and playing less gung ho passes when we have the ball. To a point, it gets a little it can get a little over the top. I've seen people do stupid things in the eyes of being just safe, and at the same time, when we were under the cosh against Milan, I saw us doing the opposite, where we were going long ball or a gung-ho ball at the first touch every time. So there's a little bit of balancing out that he still has to work on, and he's been really lucky with the fixtures, I have to say that. But yeah, I can't say that this is something that I expected, and it's way over expectation. So if we are in and around Man City and Arsenal after like 9-10 games in a season, I would have bit your hand off for that at the start of the season. So yeah,
But
no
I would
complaints.
just like to remind you rather that Chelsea are going to have a lot of players missing. So Liverpool has can still count themselves lucky and favorites in that game. This is just from his side.
Yeah, for I mean, like every player that they have missing, they have 10 other players that can step in and play. So that is a bullshit argument coming from a Chelsea fan, if at all. But we will have Allison missing, and that will be a big miss. I mean, Kelleher, if you ask me, would I take any other second goalkeeper in the league? Probably not. I think Kelleher is one of the best. So that way, I hope we'll be okay. But yeah, Allison will be a big miss for all teams. But yeah, so far so good. I'm very happy and positive about the season, and I hope he keeps going from strength to strength. We talked about the Milan game and a few other games, and Liverpool have had a 6 out of 6 point start in the Champions League. We briefly touched upon it in a previous episode, and I'm going to come to you, Ashwin, first on this. Rodri's injury happened one day after Rodri came out and said that we might have to go on strike because of the amount of football that we're playing. Rodri has been vocal about this in the past. He's talked about it last season as well, that it's a problem and that players are being taken advantage of, and you can only play 40-50 games at a high level. Anything above that is too much. And then we have this new format of Europa League and Champions League, where there are so many more games and so many more intense games right from the start of the season till the very end. So, first things first, what do you guys make? Ashwin, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of the new format of the Champions League? Is it fun for us to watch, or is it a problem for the sport? That's point one. And I'll come to you, RK, for point two, which is about the results we've seen so far.
I think in terms of the format, I feel that if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Like just don't get the point of having this big, table with like 24 or whatever number of teams that we have over there, and then then you have playoffs, then you have two extra games for teams to play. Clearly, it is being done with the aim of generating more revenue for UEFA, right? Um, Obviously, all these teams, all the so-called big clubs, wanted to have a super league uh, because they wanted more money. UEFA also obviously wanted a share of that money. They couldn't launch a super league, so they launched this instead. It's feels very obvious that that is the reason. I don't think fans really want more football. I think what fans really want is more good quality football. And if the players are continuously playing like this, like have they'll probably have injuries, or they'll have to conserve their energies in some sense, and which means that they are not going to be at their 100%. They'll probably be performing at their 70%, 75%, and try to finish each game, because players are players. Like and these are young guys. They want to be on the pitch to play. No one is going to come out and say, "Hey, I don't want to play," right? Um, but what that is doing is, obviously, you see a lot more players being injured. The likes of Rodri, who played like 80 odd games or something over the last calendar year. It's just crazy. The likes of Bernardo Silva, who should not be playing so many games as he is playing at, that's part of his career. And a lot of the other City folks as well, right? Barcelona had a few injuries. Was it was it Ansu Fati who had a really big injury 2 years back, and he was obviously being compared to Vinicius at the time, and then he had that injury, and now he's like struggling to get a place in the team. He had a failed loan move to Brighton, of all places. Like, these are the kind of things that we'll see quite often because of the amount of games that they're playing. As far as the format is concerned, I know that was your original question. I don't think it's needed. Like, the previous format was good enough. I think this takes away the essence. It just adds a bit more confusion, and it's not needed at all.
Yeah, just to play the devil's advocate here, one thing I think we can all agree on is that the group stage in its current format last season was perhaps not the most exciting. I think we can all agree. Like there were some groups, maybe a group of death here and there, which was always fun. But we didn't have Liverpool versus Real Madrid. We didn't have PSG versus Arsenal all through the season. So I can understand as a fan why this would be alluring. But yeah, I think the overall solution, maybe the solution is that the third cup eventually gets dissolved in all the countries, right? Like everybody has like a one cup and then a second cup, so maybe the second cup gets dissolved in these countries and we just cut out some games. Maybe the international calendar takes a hit, but then FIFA has a problem.
Well,
But
FIFA's
I can
FIFA is
understand the
gonna
value.
well, FIFA has just launched the Club World Cup as well, right? At the end of the season, which is obviously going to mean that clubs are playing even more games now, and the unnecessary international breaks that you have, and now they don't call it international breaks anymore. It's Nations League. So we just had an international break last month. We have one now. We have one in November. Then we have one more in March, and then we have one in June. So that's just a lot of games that these guys are playing. And as far as the format is concerned, again, I feel like we want to see those top teams like Liverpool and Madrid play each other in semis and finals, right? Like I'm more than happy for them not to clash in the group stage. Of course, it will be great to watch a Liverpool Madrid or like whatever. We did get a PSG Newcastle last time out. We did get a PSG Bayern last time out because we had that group of death. But I mean, I feel I maybe call me a purist here, but like I feel like I would much rather want to see a two-legged Liverpool Real Madrid in the quarters or semis rather than a group stage. I think this just it just causes a lot of confusion. Like PSG this season will be playing Arsenal, Bayern Munich, City, and like whatnot, whereas some of these so-called smaller teams would not be playing these big teams. So it's not even like thought of properly, in
Yeah,
my
I think,
opinion.
see, like personally, I don't mind the format. I think it's a lot more unpredictable in terms of which team you're going to face. But I don't agree that 8 matches are needed. Probably they could have, kept the number of teams at 32, kept the number of fixtures at maybe six or maximum maybe seven, right? And try to fit those in. They could have done away with maybe that playoff, or looked at some other format for that. You know, do you need to make it a single leg playoff, or how do you reduce the number of games? Basically, I have always been a proponent of someone, like just do away with the third competition. It's something which, even from the time I started watching football, that third competition didn't make sense. Or maybe, as DSK says, try to make it an underage competition for the Premier League teams or something like that, right? It's important for someone to put a spotlight on players well-being. It's high time.
Are you talking about the Conference League or are you talking about the domestic
No, I'm
competition like
talking about third competition. Yeah,
Carabao Cup, basically, in
yeah.
England? I don't think it'll happen. There's no way AFL is going to agree to it, right? Like, I mean, that's not going to happen at all. No chance.
No, it's about, again, it's about the player welfare point, right? Like I think I can't agree more about the player welfare aspect of things. But again, like RK said, I also think that there is some value on having a change in format, because to be honest, we were all, I think we had this conversation during the T20 World Cup in cricket as well, that we were all kind of just waiting for the semi-finals and finals to come around, because it was just getting a little boring and predictable till then, right? And I think the Champions League had become that. It's perhaps not, there was a need for a change, and I think they were challenged by the Super League, and they were challenged into coming up with a new format. So in that sense, I think they had to do it. But yes, it cannot come at the cost of adding more games to the calendar, and I think we're talking about, yeah, we're talking about one or two seasons here and there, but we're going to look at, I think, was it Pedri who was playing some insane amount of minutes by the time he was 21 or 22.
Yeah.
We've seen how people like Rooney, people like Fernando Torres, people like even Raheem Sterling, perhaps, who started off so early in their careers, just kind of fizzled out towards the end of their careers from a physicality point of view. I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. Who's to say that Jude Bellingham won't be that probably
Yeah.
when he's 29 or 30?
Even
So
maybe Mbappe. I mean, who knows,
He
right?
Jude Bellingham is on course to play more than 500 games by the time he's 25, which is which is a crazy stat. Like it's just crazy. But I mean, RK, going back to your point, right? Like that would make a lot of sense for the top clubs to not play in a Carabao. But like, if you think about the league, the lower leagues, EFL will not allow that competition to be scrapped because, you know, some of the lower league clubs would want to play the likes of a Liverpool or the likes of likes of a City, and they would just not let that happen. Like from
Yeah,
what I read, like, sorry, I'll just finish this point. So from what I read, the EFL has threatened to take legal actions against the Premier League as well if they even decide to do that, and that's why they got rid of some of the replays in FA Cup, but they've not been able to touch the Carabao Cup.
yeah. So, Ashwin, I think what might end up happening, and like what Arvind also kind of alluded to, is that already teams are taking it less seriously. Let's be honest; it's not the best teams that play in that format, right? And I do remember when we won the Champions League and we had to go for the Club World Cup. We sent our, because it was literally a Carabao Cup game was scheduled one day before a Club World Cup game. So we sent our first team to the Club World Cup and we let the kids play in the Carabao Cup, right? I think it'll become more and more that kind of situation. And then nobody's winning anyway. So if it's about a profit sharing agreement that gets changed a little bit and then we cull out the competition, or we make it like RK said, let the under 21s play in that in that tournament, right? It's going in that direction anyway. So I think there is a it's but the problem is there are three different parties: FIFA, UEFA, and EFL and the Premier League, four different parties. So that is the challenge. I think finding a situation that makes everybody happy is the challenge. What do you think, RK? Do you think that this? Are you excited? Tell me about your favorite results so far in the Champions League.
Yeah, I mean, see, I was always, when the draw came out, also, like I found it at least refreshing in terms of thought process, if not in terms of the number of fixtures. You look at some of the results of this game week, for example. I mean, the highlights were so exciting to watch. A team like Lille is able to beat, like Madrid at home. That's a big result. We already talked about Villa beating Munich. That's kind of like a throwaway match. I mean, throwback match, right? 1982 European Cup final is kind of relived. I think the same result as well. Villa won 1-0 in 82 as well to win the European Cup. So and then you see results like Leipzig and Juventus. Leipzig should have, for all accounts and purposes, beaten Juventus, but Juventus find a way back with the man down. Right. I think Liverpool Milan has been one of, again, kind of like a throwback fixture in a lot of ways. Although Milan has been a fading, has not really started the season on a good note. So there are a lot of shock results. You see Brest at the top of the Champions League standings, which is kind of unheard of. I think when you get a very predictable group structure where a team knows that I'm going to face this team again, somewhere down the line we have lost that predictability in the group stage, except if it's someone like Manchester United. Then it's, of course, box office, bring your popcorns, what's going to happen kind of a thing. But otherwise you don't really get too much drama and excitement in the previous years Champions League group stages.
Yeah, at the end of the day, John Duran sinking Bayern Munich, that is something that we can see a lot more of with this format, perhaps. All right, so we wanted to cover a little bit about the Manchester City 115 um, charges and the most recent fight that they had with the Premier League, which um, both sides are claiming that they won that battle. We wanted to cover that, but I think we've run out of time. So we will cover that in our next episode. And next week we have the big game, Liverpool versus Chelsea, and luckily there are no Chelsea boys on the pod to start their jinxing, to talk about how difficult life is as a Chelsea team with 80 players and 4 people injured or suspended. It must be really hard, but luckily we don't have them, and maybe they'll be back if they beat Liverpool. That seems to be the trend. When they have a good result, they somehow pop back onto the pod, so maybe we'll see them for the next episode after the big clash at the weekend. Until then, though, listeners, we will be breaking for the international week, and we'll be back once the Premier League football starts again. So until then, have a good week, have a good break. See you soon.